The Friends of Farm Foundation program can help you further expand your network with a diverse group of food and agriculture leaders. Entry-level benefits include virtual networking sessions, while contributions at the upper levels unlock additional benefits, such as a personalized tour of our new Innovation and Education campus. Help us celebrate 90 years of making a positive impact on the future of agriculture. Visit farmfoundation.org to explore the benefits of becoming a friend and supporter of farm.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our Farm Foundation Forum, Defining Sustainability, Industry Leaders on Actionable Goals. We are glad to have the opportunity to engage with you and are thankful to Farm Credit for their support of this forum. My name is Martha King, and I am the Vice President of Programs and Projects at Farm Foundation, located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I'm looking forward to today's discussion, which will look at the frontiers of sustainability in the food system. Before we get into today's program, I'm going to take just a few moments to share a bit more about Farm Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit working at the intersection of agriculture and society to address challenges that affect the entire food and ag value chain. Specifically, we are an accelerator of practical solutions for agriculture, accelerating people and ideas into action. This year, we are celebrating 90 years of doing this work. The three levers we use to accomplish this are policy, innovation, and education. Forums such as today's are just one part of our extensive program of work, which is guided by our mission to build trust and understanding at the intersection of agriculture and society, and our vision to build a future for farmers, our communities, and our world. We rely on partnerships to fund our work and increase our impact, so if you're interested in learning more about funding or partnering with us, I invite you to reach out to explore collaboration. Now, I'd like to take a moment to highlight our Friends of Farm Foundation program. With your enrollment as a friend, you will not only be helping to support the mission and vision of Farm Foundation, but you will also gain exclusive benefits such as first reads of our issue papers, networking opportunities, and much more. Being a friend is an investment in building a better future for farmers, our communities, and our world. To learn more about being a friend of Farm Foundation, go to farmfoundation.org/friends. The link is also being posted in the chat. In addition to learning more about Farm Foundation and our work by visiting our website, I encourage you to connect with us on our social media platforms. If you are posting on social media about this morning's session, we ask that you please use #FarmFoundationForum. And now finally, a few last housekeeping notes. There will be an audience Q&A session at the end. We'll be using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and not the chat, please, to queue questions. This forum is being recorded and will be posted on our website at farmfoundation.org as well as on our YouTube channel. We'll send out that link following today's program. When the forum concludes, you will receive a link to a brief survey. We appreciate your feedback and your time in completing the survey. Now let's turn to today's forum topic, sustainability in the food system. Today's outstanding panel of industry leaders will share their unique perspectives and experiences in defining and driving sustainable and regenerative practices that are shaping the future of sustainable agriculture. It's now my pleasure to introduce as our moderator and discussion leader, Dr. Trey Malone, the 2023 Farm Foundation Agricultural Economics Fellow. Trey is a food and agricultural economist whose primary research interests are agribusiness entrepreneurship and resiliency in agri-food supply chains. He currently serves as co-editor of the Agricultural and Resource Economics Review and managing editor of the International Food and Agribusiness Review. He is also an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Agribusiness at the University of Arkansas. Prior to this, he was an assistant professor and extension economist in the Department of Agricultural, Food, and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. We're so pleased to have you as our moderator today, Trey. I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Martha. Okay, so this is a really exciting event for me. The last year, as Martha said, I've been able to spend a lot of time with Farm Foundation membership and really learning about what the big Farm Foundation goals and objectives have been in the sustainability space. For example, we were just in Paris for the Global Forum on Farm Policy and Innovation, which just occurred maybe 2 months ago. And we spent a lot of time talking about exactly what the industry level needs were to move sustainability forward in the agri-food system. A couple of the key highlights that I do want to point out from that event was a focus on outcome-based approaches, as well as a larger focus on global cooperation. And probably the one thing that I think stuck out the most to me was this heavy emphasis on economic viability and productivity. For as much as we discuss the importance of sustainability, it is not abundantly clear to consumers and other stakeholders that profitability is a part of this conversation. So as we had that event, it struck me that it would make sense to go talk to the industry leadership that are actually moving the needle forward in unique ways. So one of the big conversations that I think everybody had in that event was the importance of understanding exactly what consumers are looking for. Now, when I say consumers, I don't always just mean people who eat the food. Obviously, farm products are not sold directly to the consumer quite often. And so one of the first speakers that we'll have is a representative of Walmart to talk about exactly what Walmart is envisioning when they say sustainability, regenerative, these core words that we've gravitated toward in this discussion. The next focus in this big global forum for innovation was a focus on technology. And so in that technology component, I think that there was a little bit of discussion about how biotechnology specifically can play an important role in sustainability objectives. So we'll be listening to somebody who really emphasizes the goals of sustainability within the biotech space. Sylvia Wulf, who is actually a great friend and a mentor of mine, but also just a fantastic advocate for the global food system. Now, something else that came up in that event was the importance of traceability. In the EU, there has been this large forum conversation about the EUDR, the deforestation regulation, as well as many other EU policies that I think have at least struck the radar of agricultural producers in the United States. Now, to achieve these goals, there is a large requirement of traceability, of being able to understand exactly where a product comes from. Now, in the current system, we have many commingled products throughout the supply chain. And so I think we are going to hear some really interesting insights from P.J. Haynie, who owns Arkansas River Rice and is a very strong advocate for agriculture, especially for BIPOC growers. P.J. is I would consider to be one of the leaders in the space of traceability and transparency throughout the food system. So I'm very excited to hear from PJ. Then one thing that I think I've mentioned, but I do want to re-emphasize is this excessive need, really a global imperative for global cooperation in these sustainability goals. That I don't think can be overstated. It's one thing for the United States to pass policies. It's one thing for the EU to pass policies. But without global cooperation, we are just likely to not achieve the goals that we've set forward. And this is especially true when we talk about such a difficult lexicon as we are confronting in sustainability. You know, how I use a word does not necessarily translate to how somebody else uses that same word. And for as much as that's true in the United States, it's been striking to me over the last year to see how true it's been across countries as well. And so the first speaker of the morning will actually be Richard Heath, who is he actually is a representative from Australia. In Australia, they've done quite a bit of work to try to explore this uniqueness of sustainability and what people mean when they say sustainability up and down the supply chain. Now, here at Farm Foundation, I've been working on something with a co-author about that same topic here in the United States. But Richard's really come far on really exploring and unpacking and unwinding where the outcome-based goals need to be for sustainability, as was discussed and described by the stakeholders in Australia. So as a US-based ag economist, it's actually been exceptionally useful to me to see how Australians, how Europeans, how everyone else globally is having this large form conversation. Now, I did mention a study that we're working on right now about looking at where the overlaps are. You know, if you think about sustainability as a dartboard, where is the bullseye for sustainable goals? And so we've been comparing US consumers to US producers to understand exactly where the overlaps might be between their perceptions of sustainability. And what we find is typically, consumers need to learn more about profitability and its importance as it relates to sustainability. But B, there is a focus on both and an emphasis within both samples on the passion and fury that is related to future generations. We all want to be able to leave our kids and grandkids a planet that they can live on sustainably and happily. And regardless of where we're sitting across the aisle, across the planet, we are looking for those opportunities to create a more powerful, more exciting future for our kids and grandkids. So, with that lens, I think we're probably going to be able to jump in really quickly to hear exactly not just about these kind of large form platitudes, but how we can bring those platitudes into the industry world. And I think that this is about as good a panel as you could ask for in that space. If I'm being honest, so this is probably the second most intimidated I've been in giving a presentation with Farm Foundation. The first being at the OECD. For an ag economist, it's like going to Mecca if you're at the OECD. And in this case, it's just like that, but intimidating in a different way. So I'm going to try not to talk much because the people we have on this panel are going to be so much more insightful on this. That said, I'll be handling the moderator role, and I'll be answering or helping set up and tee up the Q&A section at the end, which I'm hoping will be a very open, robust conversation. So with that, I think we're ready to switch over to talking to Richard Heath first out. Let me pull this up. Okay, so I'm going to turn the conversation over to Richard Heath. Richard has been the Australian Farm Institute's executive director since 2018, previously serving as a general manager of research there. AFI is Australia's only independent agricultural and farm management think tank. Prior to this role, Richard was an associate professor of agronomy and farm management at the University of Sydney. And before that, he was a director of his family's farming business in New South Wales, Australia. Richard is a director of the Grains Research and Development Corporation and sits on the advisory committee for CSIRO Agriculture and Food. He's a Newfield Scholar and was director of Newfield Australia. Thank you for joining us, Richard, and I look forward to your discussion.
Thanks so much, Trey, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And I can tell you at 2 o'clock in the morning here, I am certainly not feeling very intimidating at all. So you've got absolutely nothing to worry about. So defining sustainability. We at the Australian Farm Institute have been extremely proud to be part of a very large body of work with other researchers funded through the Australian Government, Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, and managed by our National Farmers Federation, to develop the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework, which you can see there on the screen now. Now, the AASF, for short, its entire purpose is to do exactly what this webinar topic is about, to define sustainability, not just for a single industry within agriculture, not just for a single geography, but for the entire agricultural industry, for the entire country, and for a full ESG scope of sustainability. So I'll just explain it a little bit briefly and then get into a bit more detail so you can be looking at it while I'm talking. It is a principles-based framework. So you can see there P1, P2, Principle 1, Principle 2. There's 17 principles that go from environmental stewardship, that cover people, animals and community, and economic resilience as well. So as I said, full ESG framework, and really importantly, covering economic resilience and profitability as much as it covers environmental aspects as well, and including human rights and other aspects of sustainability. So where did it come from, and what was the origin of the AASF? We were asked by the Australian government as part of another project. It was just in the lead up to COVID, so mid-2019, to speak to farmers around Australia about what a successful biodiversity certification scheme would look like, if the Australian government wanted to build one, because they were seeing the pressures to demonstrate biodiversity as a sustainability attribute, and felt that they could provide services in that area to a government certification process, essentially, to do that. And in speaking to farmers as part of that process, we got the very clear message, almost universal message, that they thought that there was a much better role for government than just focusing on what they thought was a very narrow part of sustainability. And what the better role was to help to provide a facilitation, essentially, to help them understand what was a rapidly evolving, very complex environment around sustainability, where they were being exposed to from multiple fronts, many different versions and definitions of sustainability, depending on whether it was an operator in the supply chain they were working in, depending on whether it was a retailer, depending on whether it was a community, depending on whether it was an input company, that were all starting to talk about sustainability, that were all starting to have different definitions of sustainability, different requirements, different reporting regimes. And there was just a very large, and continues to be, a large state of confusion from farmers about, well, what even is sustainability and what are going to be the pressures on us? How do we make sense of that? What should we be measuring and what should be reporting? And then from that, what should we be taking action on? So we set off on a process, and well, the government, first of all, actually, thankfully, because it doesn't often happen, took notice of all of that. And then they decided to fund the development of this Australian Ag Sustainability Framework. Well, our task was to build a framework with these principles that would be relevant to everything, that would be relevant to all those intersecting pressures that were coming at farmers both globally and domestically. So in meeting sustainability needs, it was very important to, and farmers did recognise that as an exporting country, we export 70% of the value of Australian agriculture. We needed, one of the main factors in demonstrating our sustainability was to be relevant to international markets. So in putting this together, it needed to cross-reference and talk to and be relevant to international reporting schemes that other countries were using, that global supply chain companies were using, so that if you were compliant with this framework, you would be compliant with any of those. It also needed to be relevant to the rapidly developing domestic framework. So virtually every sector in Australian agriculture, the beef sector, cotton, horticulture, grains, whatever, dairy, whatever industry you're in, has its own sustainability framework. They were being developed in their own silos, their own processes. They weren't talking to each other. They were talking about sustainability slightly differently as well. So again, we looked across all of those and pulled out common factors to build these 17 principles. So what does it look like in terms of being able to report against it now, which is the main thing? Because at the moment, you know, it just what is on the page at the moment, I mean, it's a very nice set of words, high level, doesn't really mean much. It would be quite easy to greenwash against, to just say, yeah, we're delivering adverse impacts to air quality. We are avoiding adverse impacts to air quality. But how do we actually then go about actioning that and showing that as a country, we're delivering progress against these, what we hope are indicators, are principles that can be understood by anyone, anywhere, as a shared value, as a shared understanding of what sustainability is. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to see now and be one of the very first groups, because this is ongoing work, this is brand new now, getting to the actual reporting that we will do as part of the Australian Ag Sustainability Framework going into the future. So to report against principles, you need some way of measuring, you need some way of showing legitimately and credibly that you are delivering progress against a principle. And so that's when you start getting into indicators and metrics. So I'm going to concentrate on principle 1 here of the framework, that net anthropogenic emissions are limited to minimise climate change. Now, that's a very broad statement, but we would hope that that is essentially a shared value, that no matter what industry you're in, whether it's agriculture or anything else, it's a member of the community, that you understand that principle as a shared value that we should all be doing. So as I said, though, from there, you need something tangible, something concrete that we can actually start going out and measuring and showing that we're delivering progress against that principle. And so you've got there a list of 7 indicators: net industry emissions intensity, share of energy from renewables, emissions per kilogram of livestock, live weight livestock, and so on. And then we can start actually looking at where there is data available across the entire industry, not just one sector, to measure that. And then look at whether we've got progress happening and the direction of the progress, and importantly, so that we can continue to improve it, what the ability to report against that metric is. So we're going to be reporting 2 things: how we're going, and how we're going in being able to determine how we're going. One of the fundamental aspects of this framework is that you, in all of this, will very rarely see practices described. You will very rarely see a description of number of acres going into cover cropping, for instance, just as an example. And that's a very deliberate thing that we've done. We are avoiding prescriptive, narrow definitions of what sustainability is and focusing on the outcomes of what sustainable practices deliver. We've done that very deliberately, as I said, because we need this framework to be able to be reported against by anyone using any practice in any sector in Australia. And trying to produce a framework that will encompass every single practice in Australia, and every single sustainability practice in Australia would be boiling the ocean. It's just not possible. So instead, we're focusing on what, again, we believe will be these universal indicators and metrics that no matter what practice you are adopting, you can show whether it is sustainable or not by collecting the data that can show progress against these indicators and metrics. So if we go to the next slide, we start getting into more detail about then just as highlighting what is actually going on in each of the industries about where the data has come from. So for instance, just some figures on the beef industry, sheep, meat and wool emissions, the dairy industry, Australian wines. We just put up a few key figures and highlights about what's happening. This is not meant to be every single piece of data. This is just, it's a report, it's highlights, it's speaking to the community about what the agricultural industry is doing. And if we go to the next page, we can get into even more detail and show, what the point I was just highlighting about how much there is out there, that all of those things describe particular practices, very, very detailed, very prescribed practices that can all be aggregated up and reported against those few indicators and metrics which relate to principles, which make sustainability an easier concept to understand and make it a much more flexible construct to deliver against, rather than saying sustainability is this practice and this is what you will do, and if you're not doing this, you're not sustainable. We're saying sustainability is delivering against this principle, and here's a way of showing that you are doing that through collecting data to be able to show progress against this indicator. So one more example, if we go to the next slide. I'm not going to go through the 17 principles. We haven't got data for the 17 principles yet. Like I said, this is brand new work. We're really only just starting on this journey. And we've done a few of the principles now, working out how we can get the information, how we can sort of start showing progress against it. So here's a bit more information about Principle 5, for instance, that biodiverse ecological communities are protected and enhanced. So I'm going to finish with if we go to the next slide, an example of why this is important, an example of why this outcomes-based approach we believe is really important for demonstrating sustainability. Now, if you look at that slide, it doesn't look very sustainable in terms of if you were just describing a practice, and particularly in the context now that we're, you know, of regenerative agriculture and soil health, where it's all about not disturbing the soil, about permanent ground cover, and so on and so on. You know, if you just took an image of that and said, oh, look at us, we're being sustainable, you'd get very confused responses. That is a picture of what has been an absolutely transformational practice that's been occurring in Australia and developing over the last decade or so of soil amelioration. We have, across much of the cropping area of Australia, very old, very hostile soils with subsoil constraints, you know, sodicity, salinity. We have things like boron toxicity. We just, you name it, we've got it in Australian soils that make cropping really difficult. We have things like non-wetting sands, where you have a layer on top that is literally, as it says, non-wetting, very difficult to get water in. But what's been realised now over time is that these soils have very complex layers. There's often multiple layers within the first foot or two of the soil profile. And through special equipment that is you know, very fit for purpose, depending on the soil that you're in, the engineering of that soil to mix up those layers, to bring specific layers to the top, to bury other layers, to move the soil around. So that stratification where you've got essentially toxic layers, but then you've got really good soil, or you've got that non-wetting sand that you could bury down and bring some clay up to the top. The ability to engineer the soil essentially to correct those constraints has led to, in many cases, the ability to double yields, to literally double yields. It has been absolutely transformational. If you can bury your non-wetting sand that's on top of the soil, bring clay to the top, it just completely changes the characteristics of that soil and enables cropping where it just wasn't enabled before. So as a single practice, not sustainable at all. It's incredibly destructive. You look at that, said there's no way you could describe that as a sustainable practice. But as an outcome of that practice over time, the sustainable intensification that enables by doubling yields without using any more land, but then also by having healthier crops with bigger root masses that stores more carbon, that has more microbiological biodiversity in the soil because there's more root activity, there's more biology, there's basically just more of everything. It is a healthier soil. Then the outcome of that is overwhelmingly sustainable and overwhelmingly positive. And that can be measured through those indicators and metrics that I showed before. But go and try and describe or convince anyone, particularly if you're trying to pose it in a regenerative ag construct, that particular practice on its own is sustainable, and it's really difficult. So that's sort of just one example of many, many out there about why we believe that outcomes-based approaches are better for delivering sustainable outcomes, and about how, with the AASF, how we can go about defining that and measuring it and delivering information to show progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That AASF framework is exceptionally helpful, so I appreciate your team for putting that together. And I encourage everybody to pay attention if you're trying to navigate some of these high-level conversations and understand exactly how this hits the ground. So with that, we're going to move into the ground. So our next speaker will be Gregory Bohrer. Greg serves as Director of Natural Capital at Walmart and Walmart.org, where he helps shape Walmart's regenerative ag strategy and manages grant making at Walmart.org, with the goal of helping farmers and ranchers build soil health, address critical natural capital risks, and create a more resilient and naturally productive agricultural system. Prior to Walmart, Gregory worked at Environmental Initiative, a Minnesota nonprofit, where he led their agriculture programming and the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative. He started his career on Capitol Hill, working on natural resource and agricultural issues for U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. Thank you for joining us, Greg. I'm exceptionally excited to talk to somebody else who lives here in Northwest Arkansas. Richard, I'm glad that you were able to join us. I'm pretty sure the rest of us live in or around Arkansas. So this is an Arkansas heavy conversation, but I guess that's not surprising in a world where, this is the backyard of the world's largest grocery store. So thank you, Gregory, for giving us some insights about how that grocery store thinks.
Thanks, Trey. Yes, as you mentioned, we are a large grocery store. So if you don't know Walmart, and I hope that you do, we are a large company that is an omni-channel retailer and a very large grocer. We had, I think, 600 billion in revenue last year, and we employ 2.1 million associates or thereabouts. And so we take our role in the system very seriously. We were founded on this idea that we can help people save money and live better. And we're now adding to that, how do we also sustain our planet? The thing that is the foundation of our business at its core. So for more than 18 years, we've been collaborating with others to drive positive impact across global supply chains. We prioritize people and planet. We aim to source responsibly, eliminate waste and emissions, sell sustainable products, and protect and restore nature. Really, it comes down to our sustainability strategy around climate, nature, waste, and people and supply chains. As Trey said, my title is Director of Natural Capital, and what that means is that I'm really responsible for our nature strategy especially as it relates to regenerative agriculture. Half my job is working in the philanthropic space, which is a core piece of our strategy to make sure that we're making investments that enable the entire sector to move forward and advance the strategy of our different sustainability pillars, but particularly nature. And then also to help advise the business on where we're going, how we can make a difference, and opportunities to collaborate with others to do that. So if you can go down to the next slide, please. Actually, we'll go one more. So the way that I'm going to lead you through this is I'm going to talk about why we're here today. Like what was the journey to get us to this point? The how of our journey, how we expect to make our change, and the strategies that we have behind that, what we're going to try and measure as in terms of like how we know that we've been successful. And then we'll go through some of the things that specifically we've done, some of our milestones, and then we'll end up with some of the resources that we've created for others to join us on this journey. So it really started in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in New Orleans. If you go back one slide, please. That was a moment where the company really mobilized on behalf of our associates and on behalf of our customers. At that time, we were really concentrated in the Southeast. This is a major business footprint for us. And that long line of trucks that you see there is waiting to get into New Orleans. That's filled with water, with food, with essentials for the people of New Orleans and the surrounding areas. And those trucks represent a full mobilization of the entire Walmart chain, distribution centers, associates, everything that you can imagine was turned loose to try and make sure that we could help our associates and customers in need at that moment. And in that moment, our CEO realized that Walmart scale could really be used to deliver good. It could certainly help us deliver on on Sam Walton's original vision of helping people save money and live better. But also it addresses our fundamental reason for being. Walmart's value in creating, Walmart's value that it can create not just for shareholders, but also for all stakeholders. And so out of that moment, our CEO turned around and said, well, what if we acted like this every day? What if we used our enormous scale and the power of our associates to deliver change every day, not just in the moment of extreme crisis? You can go to the next slide, please. That was our moment of our journey, where he came out, he made some ambitious sustainability goals around energy and some other things like that. But it really was the start of a journey that progressed into setting goals for specific sustainable products, for setting a broader vision for what Walmart could be in society in 2016. The launch of Project Gigaton and a call to action for the climate crisis to the supply chain in 2017. And then it culminated in 2020, well, not culminated, still on the journey, guys. In 2020, when our current CEO, Doug McMillon, made a commitment to becoming a regenerative company. And I would say this is a journey. This is not the end point is one where we're delivering value across the supply chain and for our customers in accordance with this vision. But Walmart is a big ship, and it's going to take a while to turn it. So this is a heading that the CEO, the board, and all our leaders have laid out for us. But what we do in all our individual jobs at Walmart is how we're going to accomplish this. So if you can go to the next slide, please. The reason why we're making these goals now, especially the commitment to regeneration, is because we're realizing that the systems that we depend on are in crisis. There's certainly the climate crisis, which we're seeing affecting the ability of the system to produce food, certainly affecting the quality of life of our customers around the globe, but also nature is in peril, cascading biodiversity loss. We've lost a lot of our birds, our pollinators, our animals across the landscape, but also marine fisheries are in crisis too. And so we rely on those natural systems to produce the commodities and the products that our customers rely on to save money and live better. And if we don't invest in the underlying fundamentals of those, we put our businesses at risk. So this is not something that's a side project. It's not really something that's a nice to have. But we see this as actually a core piece of how our business is realigning to deliver value for the customer and for our stakeholders. We have to address these crises, and we can use Walmart scale to do so. If you can go to the next slide, please. So customers are number one. If you've ever heard the famous Walmart cheer, it actually has who's number one, the customer always in it. And they care about sustainability, but they also care about, having convenience in their shopping options. They also care about, especially about having a low price that they can buy the products that they need with. So yes, a sustainable lifestyle is important to them, and they are more likely to purchase products with sustainable credentials. But that doesn't mean that everything on this shelf is going to be a premium product. What we're trying to do actually is make sure that the full assortment delivers sustainability up and down, whether it's a great value bag of flour or whether it's something higher on the shelf that has a particular ingredient that is it comes at a price premium. We want to make sure that the full assortment is delivering this and delivering it in such a way that we are absolutely not endangering our core business of helping our customers save money so they can live better. I want to be very clear on that. Sustainability is not a premium for us. It is embedded in what we do. You can go to the next slide, please. So going back to the 2020 commitment, this is a pull out of a speech that's available online, and I encourage you to go to it if you really want to see what the heading is that we're going. Walmart is on the path to become a regenerative company, one dedicated to placing nature and humanity at the center of our business practices. It's, as he said, it's our job to design everything that we do in a way that the path of least resistance is the more sustainable or regenerative approach. This isn't embedded in just a sustainability team that's working on their own. This is actually something that he is trying to embed, and we're working to help in every facet of the business. Everything from real estate to procurement to the way that our associates function in the stores, everything is with this heading in mind. And so if you can unleash 2.1 million people in a path to regeneration, you can make some pretty quick changes. Our job is to just provide the frameworks and the support that they need to be successful. If you can go to the next slide, please. So around the how do we do this? So we have a shared value approach that is one where if we're successful in our regeneration journey, society is successful, society's systems will then feed back into ours in terms of our supply chains and how we function, and we all get better, right? It's a flywheel. These aren't separate things. And so we always know that we can have the most impact by leading through the business. We have thousands of locations, millions of associates, the ability to source in different ways. $600 billion in sales means a lot of different products and a lot of different ways we can work with the supply chain to do things differently. But we also have some other things that we want to do around it. We want to be able to identify gaps in the system, places where it's not working or delivering the outcomes that we want, and we'll use philanthropy to accelerate that impact. We'll also collaborate with others. We can't do this alone. We need to be able to drive system-wide impact and whole systems change by working with others in the system. That includes our suppliers, nonprofits, government, and even our peers. So we need to be able to drive the change that we want to see certainly through the business, but there's a lot of other things that kind of go around that in our shared value strategy. Next slide, please. One more, please. So these are our priority issues. I'm going to focus on sustainability for this particular discussion. Climate, renewable energy leadership, certainly there. There's a lot we can do through our procurement of energy to actually pave the way for others to be able to do that. Zero waste in operations, products, and packaging. A lot of times when we move on a particular packaging issue, that has a ripple impacts across the entire supply chain. There's a story about Walmart, essentially saying we're not going to sell not unconcentrated laundry detergent on our shelves anymore. And we gave the supply chain a date by when that was going to happen. And not only did we save a lot of emissions because we were no longer transporting water, we also saved a lot of packaging. So on the waste side, we got a lot better there. But then because we're such a large buyer of laundry detergent, the rest of the supply chain followed suit. It didn't make sense to start splitting off product lines for other retailers. It made sense to just align to this vision across the entire supply chain and deliver that for everyone. So the systems-wide change that Walmart can lead into because of our scale and the position in the system is pretty massive. And we can do that in a lot of different places. Regeneration of natural resources, forests, lands, and oceans. That's a commitment that came out of that speech from Doug McMillan, where Walmart and Walmart Foundation committed to help protect, restore, or more sustainably manage 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. That's a lot of what my job is, shaping the strategy around how we're going to achieve that. And then certainly the dignity of people and supply chains and how we make sure that we're sourcing sustainable products. Next slide, please. So I really appreciated Richard's approach, because what we're trying to do in regeneration is move past the idea of just maintenance, right? The idea that, oh, here's what we got, let's just maintain that for the next generation. Regeneration is a much more aggressive vision than that. It is one about restoring, replenishing the systems that underlie our products and our supply chains. So it's an opportunity for us to actually build stronger systems underneath it. But certainly we can address the climate crisis and nature crisis through that. But at the end of the day, it means that our supply chains are stronger, more resilient to shocks, both for the farmers and for our suppliers, and eventually for our customers. So there's a lot of opportunities to do this. And it's also one that's a core business proposition. The way that we phrase this is not something, again, as a nice to have that is, ESG, oh, let's do something fun there. No, this is actually we're finding that this is actually really embedded in our core business strategy. There is no way around it. And so when that bottom piece of why for customer, why for company, why for associates, those are expression of our meaning, our purpose of why we're doing this. Next slide, please. So again, some of the things that we're trying to get to, these are the outcomes. As Richard talked about, we're not focused on practices, we're focused on the end goal. And in nature, especially restoring, renewing, replenishing, conserving natural resources, adopting regenerative practices that will, in the different systems that we work, that will lead to those outcomes. That's what we're aiming for. Next slide, please. So customer trust, everyday low true costs, right? Like factoring in the externalities, because we're going to be here for a very long time. They're not something for future generations to deal with. They're ones that we have to deal with now. Product supply chain, quality products. That's the Venn diagram that we're looking to make a change in. So people and planet is where we put most of our time and attention, especially with the .org team that I'm on that makes grants. But that Venn diagram in the middle, that's what we're really aiming for, is to make sure that when customers come to us, they can trust that the products that they are pulling off the shelf, again, no matter what part of the assortment they are, will produce sustainably. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get into some more specifics. Again, that 50 million acres of land, that's where I work, but we're also working on sourcing 20 key commodities more sustainably by 2025. Those are mostly grocery commodities. They include everything from beef to tomatoes to row crops like cotton, corn, soy, wheat, rice, those kind of things. We're focusing our efforts on where we think we can make the biggest difference and where there's the biggest natural capital risk that we can affect. And that, that range is pretty widely, but it means that we are really focused on where we think that the movement can happen, learning from that, and then applying it more broadly across the assortment. Next slide, please. One more. All right, so this is where we are at now. Okay, so this is where we're heading. Our goals. This is where we have gotten to. Again, to Richard's point, I love that little circle, that more of an oval that he showed, where soil health bleeds into land degradation, bleeds into protecting natural areas. These things are all wrapped up together. And so we believe that a full systems approach at the landscape level is also needed, not just around the working lands that produce the products, but everything else too. And so we've been investing for many years in the Acres for America program run by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to conserve core habitat, really important natural lands that are in the landscapes in which we source. So that's 2 million acres that we've already conserved through that program. We've invested 43 million through the Walmart Foundation within the portfolio that I'm responsible for to help more sustainably manage nature since 2021. And we're working with our supply chain to invest in core products, invest in core supply chains to make a difference. So we're using all the levers that we have available. Next slide, please. One of our biggest levers that we have is to engage the supply chain with us. And so Project Gigaton, as you saw on one of the earlier slides, was launched in 2017, primarily as a call to action to avoid 1 gigaton of emissions within the supply chain. We have, I think it's 5,200 something suppliers engaged in this now. So it's a major reporting platform, one of the largest in the industry. You'll notice that there's a bunch of different pillars here. And we've added in the last couple of years, in response to the regeneration pledge and that commitment, the nature commitment, a nature pillar where suppliers can now go in and show us, not only set goals about what they're going to do in their own supply chains for agriculture, for forestry, but then also the progress that they're making. And so I'm pleased to report that in the most recent ESG, we had, I think it was 30 million acres reported, which is fantastic. We obviously, this is a great start. We're really happy about how the supply chain has leaned in, but we have a lot more progress to go. And quite frankly, as everybody knows that has played football, it's the last few yards that make the real difference here and are the hard ones to get. So we know that we have a few more years in this commitment, but it's one that we still need to mobilize the full supply chain to be able to achieve. Next slide, please. So getting back to that protecting and restoring nature, because that's where the work in agriculture is most centered. We wanted to get to those 20 plus key commodities. We're going to continue to work on in our integrated landscapes where we have a production, core commodity production or concentration, as well as natural capital risk. We'll continue to invest in natural habitat, but we're also going to be working with our supply chain, working through the foundation to invest in the system to help farmers adopt the practices that will achieve those outcomes, to help ranchers adopt new practices that will help restore grazing land and make it more productive in the future. This is a long-term vision, but we're focused on a few core commodities, a few core landscapes. Next slide, please. we break it down, as I mentioned before, into sort of three main pillars for our nature strategy: direct sourcing and private brand, where we have, great value or members mark on Sam's Club side, where we have a direct supply chain, we control the spec, we have a close relationship with the supplier and manufacturer. We're going to work with them to specifically say, hey, here's how we're going to do this. Here's how we're going to change the way that we function and the way that we work. So we're leaning into the business, and often those direct supply chains, those private brands, those are the ones that are the opening price point on the shelf. So if we can demonstrate that you can do this without raising the price for the customer, that is a great learning for us, and we're going to apply that to additional supply chains. There's others, national brands, a lot of things on our shelves, like a pack of Doritos or a bag of gold medal flour. Those are owned by our suppliers and national brands, ones like General Mills, PepsiCo, and others. We're going to work with them to do a couple different things. Where we can, direct investments alongside them. We were just recently announced with PepsiCo, for example, that we're going to jointly invest in the change on 2 million acres of farmland in the U.S. Midwest. With General Mills, another 600,000 acres. But in lieu of that, we also want to engage them in the setting goals and reporting. That's what Project Gigaton is really about. And investing in coalition efforts. Farm Foundation is a great example of how, if you bring together everybody from the supply chain to collaborate, you get better ideas and progress out of that. Same thing there. And then finally, capacity building and investments. And that's where our philanthropic vision comes into play. Next slide, please. This is an example through our supply chain, how we're doing it. Rice is a core staple for our customers. We need to make sure it's on the shelf at a price that they can afford. And it's where we're investing directly with our supply chain to help farmers move towards more sustainable practices, particularly around irrigation, which is an opportunity to both lessen our draw on a declining aquifer that underlies the Arkansas rice landscape, but also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It ends up that the farmers are more resilient. It ends up that we get a better product. It's really a win-win for everybody in the supply chain, and that's an example of how we're directly investing in it. Next slide, please. On the philanthropic side, in Northern Great Plains, we are investing alongside, the Walmart Foundation is investing alongside McDonald's and Cargill with WWF to help ranchers in that landscape better manage the grasslands, protect vulnerable acres, and improve the health of 1 million acres of grasslands by 2025. It really is aligned with that vision of practice agnostic but outcome focused. The ranchers, they have technical assistance provided to them to diagnose, what are the issues that are on the ranch, what would they like to do with those issues, how we can support them in designing the plan, and then getting them cost share to make the changes. So that progression, that's pretty common for what we do in our programs. I'm just giving you a couple examples of how we've leaned in. Next slide, please. So where are we going? Well, this is the outcomes that we're hoping to see. This is the vision that keeps us moving. Natural systems of the planet begin to heal. Producers are more resilient. They can grow their businesses and livelihoods. We're reducing emissions. We're providing affordable, nutritious food. These are the things that keep us headed in the right direction and the principles by which we work. Next slide. And to cap it off, this is also a call to action for the supply chain and to join us. These are some of the things that we have as resources if you want to go deeper. Highly recommend you check out our ESG report. It has a lot of those resources embedded in it and way more information than anybody could ever want. Speaking to somebody who wrote it. So I highly recommend you check that out. Next slide, please. There's a lot of different things that you can dive into. There's tools that we have available to plot out where your supply chain is, what are the risk factors. You can shop for products if you want to just support us through that, to Built for Better, which is a new label that we have on our website where you can select products that have either sustainability certifications or have been sourced in a particular way that is helping to replenish and restore the natural resources that it depends on. So that was a lot, I know, and that was actually like I cut out about 3/4 of that deck about all the things that we're doing on sustainability and just tried to focus for this audience. But I'm looking forward to the questions that come up later, and hopefully we can answer some of them for you. Thank you for that. Thank you to Farm Foundation. Thank you to Trey for being a moderator here. appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Gregory. That was absolutely fantastic. And I would recommend that if you are interested in what Walmart is doing, that ESG report is actually a really good place to start. There's a lot in there. So be prepared to read and just kind of consume it. One thing that I do want to point out in that presentation is, for any producers or anybody who's engaged with producers, it is absolutely critical to understand where the grocers are, and where they're looking for and what they would like to explore. I'm really excited for the Q&A because I think we've actually already got a few questions that are queued up that will be really enlightening. So thank you, Gregory. We're now going to pivot, and in this pivot, we're going to move to PJ Haynie. Now, so Gregory mentioned some of the Arkansas rice stuff that's going on their end. I actually got to meet PJ when I was working on a World Wildlife Fund project. We visited his rice mill here in Arkansas. And the reason that I asked him to be on this panel was because I was struck by how innovative and novel that rice mill is. And so what I'm hoping for is that PJ can really emphasize this kind of importance of traceability for sustainability efforts, and really just kind of unload his perspectives and perceptions on kind of moving this market forward. For context, he's also the recipient of the 2023 Farm Foundation Innovator of the Year Award. He's a fifth-generation farmer who currently owns and operates Haynie Farms, LLC, which is a grain farming business that produces corn, wheat, soybeans, and canola throughout 4 counties in Virginia. As I mentioned, he also farms rice in Arkansas and is owner of the Arkansas River Rice Mill. PJ and his family also own an operated transportation company, specializing in food-grade liquid bulk and dry bulk transportation, a timber harvesting company, and a landscaping and excavating company. He currently serves as chairman of the National Black Growers Council. As you can tell, he is an exceptionally busy person, so I'm really glad that he could jump on the call with us. We look forward to hearing from you, PJ. Take it over for me, please.
Thank you, Trey. I am trying to unmute my video. Do my video. Can you hear me, Trey? Oh, here we go.
We can hear you. There you are.
Thank you. Good morning. Great kudos to you and Walmart and all the work that you're doing. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm thankful for Farm Foundation to have me here today. As Trey mentioned, my name is PJ Haynie. I'm a 5th-generation farmer. A 5th-generation farmer from the coastal plains of Virginia, where I grew up on my family's farm, primarily raising winter crops, winter wheat, winter barley, corn, and soybeans. And we talk about sustainability, and that was at the core of our footprint on our operation because we farm in a completely non-irrigated platform on the coastal plains of the Chesapeake Bay. Growing up planting double crop soybeans behind wheat was a natural way of life for us to try to make a crop there. Growing up in that operation, I really was focused on production in Eastern Virginia. I learned from my father what we did to survive there, growing the crops and the diversity that we had. Graduated from Virginia Tech with a degree in agriculture and applied economics. And my whole 4 years in college, I learned, I was involved in an organization called MANRS, Minorities in Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Related Sciences. And it was there where I started to get a little bit of a diversity lens and see some of the diverse, students that were in agriculture. And I didn't see that much of a diversity platform when I was in Eastern Virginia. Had the opportunity to attend several MANRS conferences and meet other students that looked like me that were involved in agriculture. After college, I came back to the family farm and began working in, it wasn't until 2010 where I had an opportunity to meet other Black row crop farmers. And, prior to that meeting, I did not know that there were other Black row crop farmers in the country on a large scale like we were, using some of the same sustainability practices and measures that we were on their farms. After that meeting, we realized that we all had a lot of similar challenges. So we started a nonprofit organization called the National Black Growers Council. And the mission of that organization is to improve the efficiency, productivity, and sustainability of Black row crop farmers. And I'm pleased to announce that we are hosting our annual meeting starting tomorrow morning in Memphis, Tennessee. We're having farmers and industry leaders from across the country joining us in Memphis, Tennessee for a wonderful conference. You heard Trey mention traceability. And as a rice farmer and as a rice mill owner, we understand the importance of that because our industry wants to know where the food comes from. We, on our farm this year, grew rice in a climate smart manner. Traditionally, rice is grown in paddies, and we've learned through some of the research that has been done that paddy rice in standing water on soil tends to release methane gas. So we try to produce it in a more climate smart way using a row watering method. So on our farm this year, 100% of our acres was row watered rice. And we did that in an effort to be more environmentally conscientious and better stewards of the land and the environment. And part of that IP, as Trey mentioned, that identity preservation, and one of the caveats that we have here at Arkansas River Rice Mill is we are able to segregate that rice. We can segregate Trey's rice from Greg's rice, from PJ's rice, and that identity preservation is really key in what retail and the consumers are looking for. When I met these other farmers with the National Black Growers Council and we started having meetings, we realized that we wanted to make sure we could get information out to the historically underserved community, because we found that that information was not making its way at the same time to our farms as it was our neighbors. So we started a series called our Model Farm Series Field Days, in which we host field days on Black farms across the country, and we bring the historically underserved community out to those farms to showcase these opportunities, whether it's new seed and chemical technology and varieties that are newly out, whether it's new equipment advances from John Deere or New Holland or whoever those equipment manufacturers are, or the utilization of tools to more efficiently water crops. Pipe Planner is a software we use for water irrigation. But this year on our farm, we hosted a field day and we showed row watering to an audience. And it was very exciting to be able to have a wide range of age of attendees at this field day, to show older farmers and younger farmers and youth and consumers what we're doing on the farm. And I think that's very critical. As farmers, oftentimes we don't like to leave the fields to go to meetings because there's so much that needs to be done on the farm. But I have found out that oftentimes if we're not there at the table, we're on the menu. And if we're not there to tell our story on what we're doing to help those consumers consume the goods that our hands produce for them, then we're not effectively telling our message. So we're very excited to be there. The other platform I'm fortunate to be part of is, in addition to all the work that we're doing with the National Black Growers Council, but this year I was part of a documentary film called Gaining Ground. And that documentary focused on Black land loss throughout the South. And as we know, agriculture is a very non-diverse industry, okay? In 1920, there were 1 million Black farmers throughout the country and 16 million acres of Black-owned land. Present day, there are less than 20,000 Black farmers in the US and only 2 million acres of Black-owned land. And what we're really trying to do is look forward in a way to help retain land ownership throughout the historically underserved community and show young men and women in these historically underserved communities about all the opportunities that the field of agriculture has to offer. Not just in the field production agriculture, but the science and the engineering and the chemistry that goes on behind the scenes. So I'm very excited to be part of that work that these organizations are doing to really improve the efficiency, productivity, and sustainability of Black row crop farmers. We know that we are feeding a growing world, ladies and gentlemen. I think agriculture is challenged with feeding 7 billion people a day globally. And by the year 2050, we're projected to feed 9 billion people. So with less and less land and by more roads and buildings and infrastructure being built, we have to grow more with less. And again, that takes us right back to our method of sustainability. Less land to produce more food, less natural resources, and we're in an ever-changing climate. So we're very excited to hear, companies like Walmart and the work they're doing in regenerative agriculture, and even Trey and some of our friends that are far that are doing a similar work as we all try to help feed a growing world. So I'm excited to be here. I'm very thankful for this opportunity to partner with Farm Foundation to share the work that we're doing with those around the world. Thank you, Trey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for also introducing Manners to everyone. I don't know if anyone else on the call is terribly familiar with Manners, but it's a fantastic organization. That's a wonderful place to start, I think, if you're looking to support this kind of future of agriculture from a novel lens. So thank you very much, PJ. I think we've also got some really good questions for you. So, all right, well, okay, so we are now moving into our next speaker. This is an area that I think is also something that maybe doesn't get discussed as much as maybe I think it should, is the role of biotechnology in sustainability conversations. So before we move into that audience question, we're going to hear this one last presenter, Sylvia Wulf. So Sylvia is a Farm Foundation Roundtable Fellow and the Chair and CEO of AquaBounty Technologies, which is a publicly traded aquaculture and seafood biotech company, leading their growth and commercialization efforts globally. AquaBounty Technologies markets the first approved bioengineered animal for food, approved both in the US and Canada. She was previously the president of the manufacturing division and SVP of merchandising for US Foods. She now serves on the boards and executive committees of the Biotech Innovation Organization and the National Fisheries Institute. So for context, I got to meet Sylvia through Farm Foundation about a year ago now, and was shocked to hear that she keeps her horses just about 1.5 miles from my house. So we've had some really good conversations in this space, and I'm really excited to hear kind of how her perspectives can really emphasize what I would consider like another producer's perspective on how to move sustainability forward. So with that, Sylvia, I'll let you kind of take over and run things for a while, and then for everyone on the call, we'll have a really nice, I think, robust Q&A following Sylvia's discussion. Take it away, Sylvia.
Thanks, Trey, and I really appreciate your including me in this this discussion in this panel this morning. And I also appreciate the Farm Foundation's willingness to expand a traditional definition of agriculture to include aquaculture, which is really fish farming, and also the importance of biotech as we seek to build a sustainable food system. And so what I'd like to discuss this morning are the following. Next slide. There we go. Why aquaculture and why biotechnology? And Trey mentioned some of the roles that I serve in currently, with my own company, AquaBounty Technologies, but just as importantly, the National Fisheries Institute and the Biotech Innovation Organization, because I really do believe that biotechnology is one of those critical tools that's going to help us solve some of the global challenges that we currently face. And what I want to talk to you about or share with you today is AquaBounty's approach, because I think, think broadly and take what we're doing and think about how can that apply, or what are some ideas that you can take away from this to apply to your own business in terms of an approach and a business model. And then I also want to talk about next generation agricultural biotechnology, some of the definitions. I really appreciate what Richard and Gregory said today, because the consumer base is changing and what their expectations are evolving. And I think that we in agriculture really need to respond to that. Next slide. So as we think about the world at large, what I wanted to talk about a little is what PJ just referenced, the fact that we've got population growth and environmental challenges. And when you think about this positively, you think food security and protection of the planet. But the reverse is food scarcity or insecurity, where people don't have the food that they need to survive, and destruction of the planet. So as we in agriculture really think about our role, it's really coming up with new solutions. And when we think about aquaculture specifically, it's actually projected to require almost 50 million additional tons of fish by 2050 to meet the growing demand because of that population growth. And then protein consumption, particularly in underserved countries, is going to continue to grow. And aquaculture, or our seafood, is a healthy protein that's able to begin to meet some of that demand for protein. And then we think about what Gregory said, the environment, the impact on the environment. More than 90% of the world's fisheries are already fully fished or overfished. And so we've got to find a way to produce seafood that doesn't further stress the oceans. And we have to do that when we think about impacts on water and energy use, because we all know, reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a goal for all of us. And current methods of farming, which are traditionally open cages in the ocean, has significant limitations because of the climatic conditions. Next slide. So as we think about, I'm going to use salmon as an example of what we're dealing with, particularly when we think about aquaculture. Seafood is a global market. It's got lots of different species and several different methods of production: fisheries, aquaculture, and then trade-offs, which are different methods of farming. So when we look at Atlantic salmon specifically, I like to say that salmon has more frequent flyer miles than most of us, because it's produced in countries where there's cold water. It's a cold water species. So you're looking at Norway, Iceland, Chile, Canada, which means that it's limited in terms of where you can produce in an open net pen in the ocean. So what that creates is a really inefficient supply chain. So how do we solve that problem? Well, the company that I work for looks at it from two perspectives. How do we use biotechnology? And then how do we use land-based systems that allow us to put salmon farms or other species farms close to consumption? And how do we then really think about reducing that carbon footprint? It's a growing market. There's a lot of demand for salmon. We all know that it's a healthy protein. So we've got to think of innovative ways to meet that growing demand when our supply chain is really constrained. So when we think about aquaculture specifically, it's really poised to be a critical component of the supply chain to provide seafood around the world. And AquaBounty really has focused on how do we play a critical role in expanding aquaculture of a healthy protein, as we seek to make sure that we're continuing to meet that growing demand. There's enormous growth potential in land-based farming. I don't know if people on this call recognize, but we actually import 400,000 metric tons of salmon annually. And we all think about, wild caught, but wild caught, say from Alaska or Canada, only provides 3% of the supply necessary to meet that demand in the US. So it's limited because, again, overfishing, we don't want to have that impact on our oceans. And so how do we think about domestic supply chain and food security by utilizing farming methods like the one that we employ? Right now, there's fewer than 100 land-based salmon projects globally, but there's a lot of interest in how do we make these farms successful. It's a very capital-intensive form of farming, but again, any nascent technology needs to be invested in, because then the cost of that production will gradually decrease. When we think about our particular company, I think one of the things that is important, and I think that Gregory referenced this, I also think that Richard referenced this, is our consumer base is evolving to a much more purpose-driven orientation to selection of the products that they put into their grocery cart. And so when I joined AquaBounty 5 years ago, one of the first things that I wanted to do was really understand from our team members, what is it that draws them to work for AquaBounty? I mean, we are a small early stage company. And so we had lots of discussions about what is our purpose and what does that look like for them? And then how do we want to work with one another? And what evolved from that is an articulation of why they came to work for us. But I think it's as important to understand that consumers, particularly young consumers, also want a purpose-driven purchase strategy. So our vision is really to feed the world by transforming aquaculture with technology, creating a safe, secure, sustainable future. And just as Greg talked about, sustainability is fundamental to our purpose and what we call our epic values. And it's a critical foundation on how we operate our business because it allows us to really deliver the results that are necessary to continue to be sustainable from a financial perspective. And we drive continuous improvement throughout all of our operations. I actually believe that ESG, much as Greg articulated for Walmart, is actually a proxy for a well-run business. And that what we've done is embed that in all of our strategies and all of our operational components of our business. And so let me talk a little bit about our journey because it's long and it's one that I don't think a lot of companies would want to repeat. So over almost 34 years ago is when the genetic modification of our salmon took place. And it was done at Memorial University in Canada. And what that researcher was really trying to accomplish was, how does he protect the salmon in its very early vulnerable stages from climatic conditions? So originally the intent was to put it into ocean net pens, and salmon typically go into those net pens at a very early stage, but they're vulnerable to either, warming oceans, Arctic chills, parasites, etc. And what he wanted was to create resilience. The genetic modification that took place was he took a growth hormone gene from a Chinook salmon and embedded it in the genetic structure of an Atlantic salmon. And what that enables is as I said, in those early vulnerable stages, our salmon grow faster. So they get through those stages very, very quickly. So they get to a growth cycle that can be as much as, so typically in net pens, it can be 30 months to reach a harvest weight, and we can accomplish that in 18 to 20 months. So it took us 25 years to go through the regulatory approval process. And as Trey said, we're the first bioengineered animal that was approved for food use in the US, Canada, and now in Brazil. But because there wasn't a construct for that regulatory approval, we had to work closely with the FDA and make sure that that there was stability in that genetic structure. And that took us 25 years. Most companies, especially the size of ours, can't sustain that kind of investment over that time. So we were approved in 2015, and then in Canada in 2016, but then we ran into political challenges. And so this is something else I want to make sure that we talk about, because I think that biotechnology isn't well understood by consumers. And I think and we're going to talk later about consumer reaction and understanding of some of those critical terms and definitions. And why that's so important is we became a target because we were a genetically engineered salmon for those that really wanted to protect their own special interests. And so there was an import alert placed on our business, and we couldn't import our salmon eggs. We have a broodstock facility in Canada, and we have a farm in Indiana, and we weren't able to bring those eggs into the US. Well, that import alert was then lifted, and we started farming in Indiana in 2019, and then began harvesting salmon in 2021. Now we're continuously harvesting at that small facility in Indiana, and we're building a large-scale facility in Ohio. So what I want to make sure that the audience really appreciates is those are salmon farms in the heartland of America. those are both agriculturally oriented states. So we don't need to be on the coast. Any place that there is quantity and quality of water is where we can locate our farms. And we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about why that, we use the word circular economy, why that's so critical to AquaBounty and the way that we farm salmon. But first, let me talk to you about our operating principles. So that when we think about our business, as I said, we have farming expertise. We've been using land-based recirculating aquaculture system farms for 25 years. And that's translatable to other species, which allows us to build these kinds of farms close to consumption. But most importantly, it improves biofiltration. So think about a big aquarium. Some of you may have had aquariums when you were growing up or even now. How do you clean the water? How do you make sure that the fish have oxygen? How do you remove carbon dioxide? That's what the technology enables us to do. And it also allows us to recirculate close to 99% of the water that we use to grow our fish. And then from a technology perspective, we use, as I said, genetic engineering. We're working on gene editing, but also selective breeding to improve the resiliency and productivity of any species that we work with. And then we think about fish health and nutrition. What are the additives and ingredients? And we do a lot of work with the U.S. Soybean Board because the majority of fish feed is actually soy-based. And one of the big efforts that we're undergoing as an industry right now is to reduce the amount of fish meal and fish oil, which is produced through bycatch, so that it is a more sustainable approach to feed. And then we want to use data. When we think about how farmers are incorporating data solutions to improve their operations, we're doing the same thing with fish farming. And then again, we continue to need to make sure that we are having discussions with regulatory bodies so that they're prepared to have a transparent, predictable regulatory approval process. But let's talk a little bit about what we bring to consumers specifically. We believe that we're better for the environment and we provide more of a healthy protein for consumers. So because these farms can be located in agriculturally oriented areas where there's access to good water, we have a domestic supply of salmon that we can create, because right now the U.S. is not self-sufficient. As I said, we import 400,000 metric tons. So we're optimizing those conditions and we're providing a consistent source of salmon for the U.S. market. And we're looking at other countries around the world. Again, they're near consumption. And what that allows us to do is to reduce that carbon footprint. The salmon are raised in biosecure environments. So our salmon aren't exposed to climatic conditions, predators, disease. And we don't, one of the big concerns is, well, what happens if your genetically engineered salmon escapes from your farm? And what happens to, a native population? Well, the first thing is our facilities are designed to prevent escape. And the fish that we farm in those facilities are sterile females. So we've thought about how to protect native populations. And the other thing is growing salmon in Indiana and Ohio, pretty much no risk to native salmon populations. But just as importantly, we don't raise those salmons with salmon with antibiotics or chemicals. And that provides a consistent consumer need that we want to reduce antibiotic resistance. And so we don't use antibiotics to raise our salmon in these land-based farms. But another aspect of the genetic engineering that took place is our salmon are incredibly efficient in the use of their feed. And they actually have a feed conversion ratio of less than 1-to-1. And so seafood in general is a very sustainable form of protein production, but our salmon are even more effective because we use less feed to produce a pound or a kilo of body mass. And then, as I said, we really think about making sure that we're protecting the planet. We recycle 95%, we're actually closer to 99% of the water that we use. We reduce the transportation necessary to get to those consumption markets. And one of the other aspects of the way that we think about our farming is, what do we do with our waste streams? And if you think about fish farming, our waste streams are carbon dioxide, which, we're capturing carbon now. We're looking for ways to do that. And then the fish waste, can it go into renewable energy? Can we produce methane to fuel our farms? Can we use our waste as a biofertilizer? We do that in Indiana right now. Our waste is then used by farmers, because we sit in the middle of cornfields, as a fertilizer for those cornfields. And we're working with fertilizer companies right now to think about how do we use this as a potential ingredient in fertilizer going forward. So let me show you a picture of the different of our farms, because I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. And we have a research facility and hatchery in Bay Fortune, Canada. We have a broodstock facility in Rollo Bay, Canada. So we grow out our broodstock, and that's where all of our selective breeding takes place. That's a picture of our Indiana facility, which is capable of producing about 1,200 metric tons of Atlantic salmon. And in the bottom right-hand corner, that's a picture of the construction going on in Pioneer, Ohio, which is Northwest Ohio. It'll be a 479,000 square foot facility that's capable of producing 10,000 metric tons of Atlantic salmon. And we picked that site because it is an agriculturally oriented area, so use of the waste streams. It has access to quality and quantity of water. And the other thing is, it is in a rural area that's really challenged economically. And so one of the other reasons that we selected that site is because we really believe in rural rejuvenation and the role that aquaculture, this specific type of farming, can play in rural rejuvenation. And so we'll bring about 120 new jobs to that area. And we're working closely with the high schools, the technical colleges, Ohio State University, et cetera, to really think about how do we make aquaculture part of what we see as the agricultural landscape in Northwest Ohio. Then let's think about a little bit in terms of technology itself. When we look at it, as I said, we want to continue to optimize technology and innovate for the future. And we really believe that biotechnology is going to play an increasingly important role. Genetics, gene editing, turning on or off certain genes that allow it to grow faster, that make the fish more productive, more resilient, etc., is something that we really focus on. Then we look at the environment where we grow them. We want to make sure that we are optimizing that environment for the safety of, first of all, for the safety of the fish, the safety of the people that are part of our company, but more importantly, to maximize the performance and optimize what we're able to produce. And then another aspect of our R&D is really nutrition and disease, or nutrition and health. And that's where I said we're working with feed companies to make sure that we're looking at better feed formulations, the sustainability of that feed, better performance in these farms, because you're dealing with two different biologies, the biology of the biofiltration system itself and the biology of the fish. And the other thing we want to do is continue to enhance that nutritional profile. We all eat salmon, those of us that do, because it's got a really healthy fatty acid profile, omega-3s and 6s. And so you think about brain health, you think about heart health. This can really help change the diets that then affect health of our population. And so that's something that we really do focus on. And then where are we in our journey? So we continue to achieve milestones. We are a very small early stage business, and we struggle, just like every early stage business, to scale. And so we want to continue to expand our productive capability. That's what Pioneer, Ohio is all about. We want to continue to make sure that we are growing our capabilities in R&D and technology investments to support that growth. We use our farm in Indiana to really fine-tune our standard operating procedures and our work instructions and our training, so that we're able to make sure that we're protecting and we have good animal welfare practice in place, but protecting our people, and that we're able to do continuous harvesting and demonstrate to the world that GE salmon is a very sustainable way to introduce a healthy protein into your diet. And then one of the things we do struggle with, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, is consumer perception around GMOs and why we really need to work on collectively changing that perception. And so we're engaging in dialogue with consumers to help them understand, why did we genetically engineer the salmon? Why is it better for the salmon? Why is it better for the consumer? Why is it better for the planet? And then working with customers to create long-term supply agreements. And to do all of that, we continue to focus on our financial health and our ability to be sustainable financially. But let's talk a little bit about the consumer confusion and perceptions that currently exist. Consumer Reports did a study, and they surveyed a number of different respondents, consumers, to understand what phrases are they familiar with when you think about regenerative ag or sustainable farming. So they understand organic farming, they've heard the term sustainable farming, they understand a little bit about climate and regenerative ag, but a lot of them, really haven't. There's still a good percentage that hasn't heard any of those terms. So what is it that we need to do as an industry to engage in that conversation with consumers? So let's go to the next slide. What do you think sustainable food really means as far as you understand it? And the response was, depleting the soil, produced with a low carbon footprint. Some of the things that we talked about earlier today are absolutely critical to consumers going forward, because they really want a purpose-driven purchase strategy for themselves, and they want to understand traceability, like PJ talked about. And so these are aspects that we really need to work on collectively as an agricultural industry to help consumers understand what regenerative ag really and sustainability really means, and the roles that farmers and ranchers are playing in making sure that we bring this to light. And then lastly, the next slide shows which would you expect from a company that says it has sustainable agriculture. So these are the things, this is the messaging that consumers are looking for to better understand that a company that they purchase from is committed to advancing sustainable agriculture. And I use these slides to frame the very last slide that I have, which is really, the role that agriculture can play in strengthening the bioeconomy. Because if we think about biotechnology specifically, and we look at what happened a few years ago with labels that said non-GMO, what that did was create in a consumer's mind a safety concern. But we've been eating GMOs for a long time. It's why we have one of the most productive agricultural economies in the world. And we want to help consumers embrace GMOs and biotechnology, because it really is going to be one of the tools in our toolbox that solves for productivity and meeting that the food security challenges that we face as the population grows. And also, how are we going to protect our planet? And when you think about solutions that biotechnology can bring, as PJ said, how do we produce more with less land? How do we improve the nutritional aspects of some of the foods that we eat? How do we create climate resilience and making sure that they're drought resistant, pest resistant, etc.? I also serve on the board of an organization called Two Blades, which is a 501c3 focused on addressing diseases in plants, particularly as it relates to third world countries that are really challenged in terms of climate, pest, and access to different solutions for that. So how do you deal with soybean rust? How do you think about potato blight? Those kinds of things. And so, biotechnology can solve some of those challenges that are currently faced in countries that aren't as economically resilient as the US or some of the Western societies. But what do we need to do? We need to grow trust in innovation. We need to address climate change and food security. We need to improve the regulatory approval process and promote innovation on a science-based, predictable, transparent regulatory process. And then we need to continue to work together to increase market access and acceptance. And so again, I use AquaBounty as an example because it's an example of a new method for farming and bringing a different type of agriculture to the U.S., but also how we use biotechnology to solve some of the challenges that we face, and what we can collectively do together to make sure that we are, in fact, creating a resilient and sustainable food system. So thank you, Trey.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sylvia. I think your company is absolutely fascinating. The way I was at a meeting with Marty Matlock, who's on the National Academy of Science Board of Ag and Natural Resources yesterday, and he put it to me this way, that salmon in native fisheries are basically like buffalo in the grasslands in the 20th or the 19th century.
Right.
And so I think that it is a very urgent call to talk about these things in a way that we actually are preemptively addressing these problems before we've completely depleted these fisheries. So thank you for those insights. As we move into the Q&A section of the panel, I would ask the panelists to please turn on their video again. For everybody on the call, please make sure that you're posting your questions in the Q&A panel. There are a handful of questions in this webinar chat, but it's kind of hard to navigate through that. That said, I do have kind of an open question that I think that as industry leaders, we maybe hear a lot, and maybe we'll start with Richard on this. Can you kind of walk me through outcome-based agricultural sustainability versus greenwashing? You used the word in your presentation a little bit, but I'm just hoping you could maybe delineate between those two things really quickly, so when we have these industry conversations, we understand exactly where we're sitting.
So I think that the biggest thing that avoids greenwashing is having those really credible, scientifically based indicators and metrics that can have hard data essentially collected against them to show progress. Without those, then the potential for greenwashing and just marketing statements essentially saying, yes, we agree with this principle, and ticking a few boxes to show that we're doing what we can to deliver progress against it is real. Data is what gets rid of greenwashing. And data against agreed on, credible, scientifically based indicators and metrics.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Gregory, do you have any kind of thoughts on that from a Walmart perspective?
Yeah, it always helps to have sort of that independent validator or independent verifier on the data to be able to, if you've, the whole point of establishing a key progress indicator, right, that's what you want to manage to. That's what you want to change about the system that you're working in. And so those KPIs look very different depending on the system that you're in. If you're in grassland ranching, maybe the KPI is, does every rancher have a written grassland management plan? Or is it the vegetative cover that's on the landscape as an indicator of the health of the grassland itself? In rice farming, it's probably bushel per gallon, right? It might be an indicator of how efficient you're being on irrigation, or it could be on methane emissions, which is really hard to measure and validate. But for all of those, you can construct systems of data collection that will get you to that. And it's worth having that third party take a look at it, because then you can often figure out if there's a missing link, right? If the models aren't working, or they're not calibrated to that system, or it just gives you the opportunity to continue to manage towards your goal if you are collecting the data, getting it scrutinized, and then being able to credibly publish the results. We do that in every program that we've got, but it just looks very different depending on what you're trying to manage to.
Yeah, those are great responses. PJ, I'm wondering if I could pivot in from that into what you mentioned about identity preservation. So, with that data access requires identity preservation to be able to maintain the data set. Can you kind of give us an example or kind of walk us through how that identity preservation can not only create, a more sustainable future, but also market opportunities? And maybe from what you're doing or what your mill's been doing or is pursuing, to give us kind of a specific example in that preservation space.
I'm happy to, Trey, but I would be remiss if I didn't just comment on the previous question. With that data that's collected, oftentimes I'm as a farmer reminded to let everyone know we do the same amount of work, but Mother Nature holds the cards for us, guys. We can put the same amount of work into cover crops and to sequester carbon and all that we're trying to do, but the volatility that we see in weather patterns really changes that. We may put out the same amount of work this year and get half the yield as next year. No different than farming. So I oftentimes urge that people don't measure the data that's extracted, but farmers need to be rewarded for the work that they put into these operations and into these efforts. Going back to your identity preservation, and I think I shared that one of the things we did, we looked at row-rotted rice on our farm this year. And, and some organizations out there are looking for that climate smart rice that was grown with less water. And, I'm hoping to go back and push Greg a little bit on that one, say, hey, if you're looking for some, we got some. But at the same time, farmers who put in the work to actually reap those rewards need to be able to segregate their rice and not just have it commingled. And that's the importance about identity preservation. Rice is a great crop because we can grow it on our farms in the Delta here, and we can consume that. But on the other hand, it does require a lot of work. And when you look at rice production traditionally, if you don't have fields that are zero graded, or you don't have fields that are precision level, you don't have fields that have irrigation, you can't get in rice production. And that's one of the things that we saw, that in the historically underserved community, that there's not enough equitable rice production across the board. So, how do we catch up the underserved community and get their farms included in these same higher opportunities for this identity preservation like our neighbors? So hope that helps answer the question, Trey.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this ties really nicely into what Vicky Sallin just posted as a Q&A. She's asking specifically about Sylvia's take on AquaBounty's post-harvest value chain. But I think that really everybody can have something to say here about post-harvest value chain specifically. So how these things are monitored, what the metrics are. Ultimately, I think the challenge here is we like to talk about farmers, and farmers are at the core of this, but there is all of this stuff that happens post farm gate that is also required in order to maintain a sustainable food system. So Sylvia, if you want to start, and then everybody else kind of can jump in on their take on that post harvest component.
So, Trey, as I said, we really think about everything that's produced, not just the salmon. And that caused us to start thinking about what else could we do with waste streams, et cetera. And then how does that really fit in terms of where we locate the farms? And so we've been doing quite a bit of work on all of those waste streams, so that so thinking about co-location with aquaponics or hydroponics, using those waste streams to grow a different crop, because their inputs are our outputs. So we think about renewable energy, and we're looking at potentially, we sit in a dairy production area. And so we're working at, can we create a starter culture where we can aggregate dairy waste with fish waste and create, renewable energy with that. So that's another way to collaborate with farmers, around the area. And then lastly, really thinking about fertilizer, because we're high in nitrogen, we're high, the fish waste has some pretty interesting properties from a fertilizer perspective. And so how do we look at each one of those individual waste streams, where we sit, making sure, one of the questions was, what do you do with your water, wastewater? Well, we built a state-of-the-art treatment facility so that we could extract that waste. We don't want to put that back into the environment. We want to utilize that in a way that really provides a benefit to other forms of agriculture.
Anybody have further thoughts on kind of that post-farm gate I think, Sylvia, one thing that was really nice in that presentation of that is there is this global growing concern about food waste or waste within the system. And I think it is really important for everybody to hear that there are all of these innovative things that are going on pre and post farm gate to try to reduce those food waste impacts or those waste impacts, whether it be fish waste in this case, or on farm, there's all types of different opportunities. Shell casings from peanuts are another example. All kinds of different market opportunities that are just looking for entrepreneurs to step into it. Does anybody else have some thoughts on that kind of post-harvest?
Yeah, sure, Trey. Look, I'll just mention how much the you mentioned at the beginning of this session the EU deforestation regulation, and I think that's a good example of a new piece of regulation that's going to impact international trade to be able to access European markets where, yes, the first point that you have to demonstrate is there hasn't been deforestation in the production process, but included in that regulation is a demonstration of every point from there to the market in Europe that the products are being processed in accordance with local laws and regulations that encompass the full range of sustainability attributes. It is not just the production, it is the entire supply chain that is getting pulled into under that regulation. And I think that's just an indicator of the way that a supply chain focus is going to be brought to bear with much of around trade requirements for sustainability into the future as much as just the production focus.
I'd like to jump in here on something about the post-harvest infrastructure and all that. It is a challenge for us on transparency. What PJ is doing is really interesting in rice because I think it's helping us envision what it could be in other supply chains. Rice is an interesting one because though it is a commodity along with wheat or something like that, it's one where in a lot of cases, there's a much more direct connection between the grower, the processor, and then the retailer. I mean, we sell bags of rice, right? But in other things, it gets a lot more complex when you talk about sustainability metrics and then the sort of passing of those metrics along the supply chain. To give a different example would be, okay, so you're a soybean grower in Minnesota, right? Maybe you sell that to the Cargill crush mill in Mankato. The crush mill then, separates that out into soybean oil and soybean meal. The oil goes off into a variety of different products. The meal maybe gets sold to another aggregator that mixes it into a feed product for hogs. And those hogs then get bought from the farm into, say like the Hormel processing plant. And then the package of bacon eventually comes to us. How do we get to the sustainability metrics on those soybeans? I have no idea, right? Like that's where we get when you have that level of complexity in a fungible commodity system where you can have 5 or 6 actors touch the same bushel of soybeans before it gets to you and it's all commingled at every point. How do you say those were farmed sustainably? So, the approach that we're taking in a lot of cases where it's too complex, the cost of it would be too much, is at this point we're taking a landscape level approach. We are looking at where do we expect that those soybeans were farmed. I mean, just going with this example, right? It's not a real world one, but in this case, it helps. Where were those soybeans grown on the landscape? Total production, right? Not just an individual farmer or field. How do we make sure that full landscape, we're moving every farmer in that along the continuum of helping them adopt practices that result in the outcomes that are most critical? How do we assess our progress at the landscape scale? And then how do we credibly take reporting, make credible reporting for that progress? Those are all questions that are being worked out in real time right now. We don't have good systems to rely on for that. And we also don't want to do it at such a level that it's so expensive that a cost gets passed on to the customer that is really not value added, right? Like the traceability, transparency, and data costs don't allow a customer, they don't give any benefit to the customer, right? And they don't give any benefit to the farmer in a lot of cases because they're not getting paid more for that. So how do we make sure that most of the money is going to the impact that we want to see, the minimum level of data transparency and traceability that we need to be able to demonstrate credibly that this has happened, and not expect a customer to pay more at the end of the day, because that on a societal level is not a good thing to say, oh no, we're just going to increase the cost of food. Well, that's not what we're trying to do here, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one of those like cruxes of the problem is like this all is currently in a very inflationary environment where the last thing that we want to do is even risk the potential for increasing the cost of food. So this speaks, I think, to the importance of resiliency in sustainability, and looking for ways to I guess diversify the risk through sustainable practices. So on that note, actually, there are two things that I think are kind of popping out. One thing is kind of this area of consumer preferences, I think the intersection specifically between misunderstanding in biotech and misunderstanding in sustainability, I think, is right for the beginning of that conversation. So if you could talk a little bit about, at least to jump off, kind of the approaches that you found maybe work in negotiating and navigating consumer misperceptions in gene editing. And then maybe you and then the rest of the group can talk about how those experiences might translate into navigating this sustainability lexicon.
Sure. The first thing I'd say that is absolutely critical is to build trust with the consumer. And trust is built based on a science-driven, transparent, predictable regulatory process. And so, consumers really need, and this is what I've said over and over again, is, our regulatory bodies the people that are in the different levels, not necessarily the political people, but the people that do the work every single day, there's no reason that they would want to put an unsafe product on the market. And they're good scientists, and they may not have the best tools, but they're good scientists. Their families eat that food. And so, they want to make sure that they're doing everything required to make sure that there is a safe product. And that's why I think that, defining what science is required, what submissions need to be, how they need to be constructed, are really going to be critical to building that trust with consumers. There's this everybody worries about GMO safety. Let's separate a chemical conversation from a plant conversation, okay? And, again, we've been eating GMO products, and I think that they are proven over and over and over again to be safe. Now, I also think it's incumbent on us to be looking at the impact on the environment at large, right? How do GMO crops affect neighboring crops? We need to make sure that we're thinking about all of that as well. But that's testing that needs to be very well defined, that the science that's required is clear. And we cannot make it so expensive that only the big crop companies or only the big animal tech companies can do the testing required. And so again, I think it's working with our regulatory bodies. And I will say that even though I believe that the US has one of the most well-respected group of regulatory bodies in USDA and FDA, there are other countries that are much more progressive in their approach to gene editing than the US, and have figured out pathways for regulatory approval. And when we think about Europe, and you were just there, Trey, Europe is starting to really wonder how are they going to do a bit of a backpedal on genetic engineering, because in fact, you can make smallholder farmers, which is the group that they tried to protect with an anti-GMO approach. You can make those smallholder farmers much more productive and much more economically viable, but you closed off use of that tool. And so now, they're thinking about, well, how do we approach gene editing? Because that's something that could, in fact, create more productivity for smallholder farmers and address some of the challenges that they've got. So I think, really understanding it needs to be science-based, very transparent, and very predictable globally is the first step.
Okay, so we're coming tight on time. So actually, I'm going to try to combine that question. So I want you guys to answer that one, but also I think Jordan Shockley over at the University of Kentucky has a really nice question that I think also ties those two things together. He's asked, while consumer preferences are changing, who ultimately bears the cost of implementing sustainable practices on the farm? So if everybody can kind of have their last word on that. We have about 2-ish minutes, 3 minutes left. So it's got to be pretty tight. I know this is literally a whole book chapter. But if you could kind of address that a little bit and maybe point to some resources that might expand on it.
So I'll have a go first, and I'll probably, not surprisingly, go straight back to outcomes-based approaches, because outcomes should be based on shared values, and we all have shared values around sustainability. And if we start with those rather than what we tend to do a lot of the time as practitioners, as scientists, which is go to the technical specifics of something, it's very hard then to communicate that as a value. We need to show, yes, I have the same value as you, and then this is how I am delivering against it. Who bears the cost of it then? I think that where there has been perverse outcomes, unnecessary costs, where farmers have got really worried about the burden, is where you do have these approaches, particularly regulatory approaches, that are based around prescribed approaches, prescribed practices, which may not be suitable, which require change, which require cost. If it is all about the outcomes that you are trying to deliver and incentivizing the outcomes, then the most efficient way of delivering those that actually provides a productivity benefit as well is what ends up happening through innovation. So I think we can, through that outcomes-based approach, we can both communicate better, share values, and do it in a way that is not going to be cost prohibitive.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'll try to chime in real quickly, Trey. A lot of this cost up front, the farmers bear it, because it's the change of production and practices. Granddaddy would say, go plow that soil and have it warm so spring can, crop will germinate a lot faster, versus, I try to argue with cover crops and with the work they're doing, but the ground stays cooler faster. So if I'm a week later planting because soil temperature doesn't rise for germination, how does that affect? The other example would be in this row watering with rice. There's some yield curves and challenges with that, as it would be paddy rice. But at the same time, we're learning that what we're saving on greenhouse gas emissions, so methane gas emissions. So it's a learning curve initially as we start to change. And one of the reasons we're at the National Black Growers Council, our partnership with the USA Rice Federation and Ducks Unlimited for a Climate Smart grant, we are incentivizing those farmers to change their practices. So I think if we can help the farmers bear the cost that they're going to have up front and the adjustments that they may have with the yield losses and productivity, that will really incentivize this change. And therefore, ultimately, we can look at more the downstream, the end users of the product, not just the consumers, but really the businesses that take the products that we grow and process them for the consumers. So, I say don't hurt our farmers who are growing our foods.
Okay, Greg, you get the last say, so make it good.
Okay, I'll do my best. I think that everybody's right in the answers to the questions. I also think that the question itself, it can sometimes be misleading, because it's like, who pays? Well, everybody pays, right? We all pay, in the sense that if we don't have a resilient production system, we suffer for it. When drought hits Kansas, as it has for the last few years, and the wheat crop suffers, we all pay in the form of increased prices at the grocery store, right? The wheat prices go up, the consumer pays. So in that case, we pay for the risk, and that means we also should all be paying for the resilience that we're trying to bake into it. And so when you say who pays, I say everybody, because it should be the customer who benefits, right? It should be the retailers and the suppliers who are off-takers of it and benefit from a more resilient production system when they've invested in the farmer and the rancher. the farmer and the rancher should also have a stake in it, right? They're making the change. They should see the value from it, and they should also share in the risk of it. And then the public pays too through the cost share that's available for these practice changes through USDA or others. The mix should be there to help the farmer or the rancher make the transition successfully from system A that maybe is more risky on the long term to system B that's more resilient and naturally productive on the long term, because that's the jump that we want to occur. But I don't also see a system where there's a permanent subsidy or permanent premium paid by the supply chain for this. I think that there can be, over the 3 to 5 years of adopting a practice, a certain significant help in making that change. But if we're relying on that change to be durable, it has to provide inherent value to the farm or the ranch to continue to do it, right? Irrigation efficiency in rice farming shouldn't just be like, okay, the program has stopped paying, I'm going to take off the equipment. No, the equipment should be durable because the farmer is getting a continued benefit for it, even if there's not an external incentive provided. That's the system that we're trying to shift to, right? Is one that helps the farmer make the transition, but the transition itself, after it's been set into place and the change management has occurred, is durable and of value to the production system without necessarily an external incentive provided. That's maybe a controversial opinion, but there's a lot of acres, a lot of farmers, a lot of ranchers that we need to help through this process. And so I'm always looking to how do we get to the next tranche? How do we get to the next cohort of folks that we can assist with our programs?
Yeah, that's a great way to finish it up with controversy. So I think we'll be able to jump into this one-on-one. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand this back over to Martha so she can close us out. And thanks again to the panelists. This was exceptionally useful to me, and I think to everybody on the call.
Great. Thank you, Trey. Thanks to all of our speakers for the insightful discussion today. I'd also like to thank all of you in the audience for joining us and submitting your questions. We appreciate your engagement with us, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So please take a moment to share your comments about today's session in the brief survey you will see at the conclusion of this forum. If you would like to help us continue providing valuable programming such as today's forum, I'll quickly remind you about becoming a friend of Farm Foundation. Check the link provided in the chat to learn more. Each and every gift of Farm Foundation strengthens our ability to address rapidly evolving issues impacting agriculture, the food system, and rural communities, and we are so grateful for your support. Thank you once again for joining us today. We will now conclude the forum.